Everyone feared Jang Min-ho, not because he shouted, not because he threatened, but because nothing in this world could make him hesitate. From the top floor of his penthouse, he watched Seoul burn with light while men ruined lives in his name. A phone buzzed. Another betrayal. Another problem erased. Min-ho didn't ask questions. He didn't react. He simply signed, nodded, and turned back to the window. Until the night a single woman walked into his office, and quietly set in motion the one secret that would shatter his empire. At 32 years old, Jang Min-ho had already become a legend in Seoul's underworld. The youngest man to ever consolidate the 5 major crime families under one banner. The only boss in 2 generations who'd never lost a territory war. The kind of man whose name was whispered in backrooms and corporate boardrooms alike. Because in this city, power didn't care about legality. It only cared about control. And Min-ho controlled everything. "Sir, the meeting with the Busan delegation is confirmed for tomorrow night," his assistant said from the doorway, careful not to step inside without permission. Even his own people feared him. "Good. Make sure they understand the terms are non-negotiable." Min-ho's voice was quiet, measured. He never raised it. He never had to. "Of course, sir." The assistant bowed and disappeared, and Min-ho was alone again. The way he preferred it. The way it had always been. People often wondered what made Jang Min-ho so dangerous. Was it his intelligence? His ruthlessness? The network of loyal soldiers who would die at his command? No. It was something far simpler, far more terrifying. It was his emptiness. Min-ho felt nothing. Not rage, not guilt, not fear. He'd learned early that emotions were liabilities. Weaknesses that got you killed or, worse, controlled. So he'd locked his away so deep that even he couldn't find them anymore. Love. That was for fools who didn't understand that everyone betrayed you eventually. Trust. A fantasy sold to children who hadn't yet learned how cruel the world really was. Hope. The most dangerous lie of all. He'd watched his own father destroy himself over a woman who left him. Watched his mother's love turn to poison when power called louder. Watched allies become enemies the moment money or fear tipped the scales. So Min-ho built his empire on a single truth. Control everything, trust nothing, feel nothing. It had worked perfectly for 15 years. His penthouse was immaculate. Cold. Modern lines, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his domain. But no photographs. No personal touches. Nothing that revealed the man who lived here, because there was no man left to reveal. Only the boss. Only the weapon. Min-ho stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghosting across the glass. Sharp suit. Sharper eyes. A face that women called beautiful and men called dangerous. He looked every bit the part he played. But sometimes, in moments like this, when the city was quiet and his empire was running smoothly, a strange thought would creep in uninvited. Is this all there is? He crushed it immediately. Poured another drink. Reminded himself that men who asked questions like that ended up weak. Vulnerable. Dead. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was his cousin Jin-woo, one of the few people he tolerated. "Hyung, we have a situation at the Gangnam property. The new development. There's a consultant refusing to approve the permits. Says there are ethical concerns." Jin-woo's voice dripped with sarcasm. Min-ho's jaw tightened. "Handle it. I tried. She won't budge. And she's American, so we can't use the usual pressure tactics without drawing attention." She. Yeah. Some corporate auditor brought in by the International Investment Group. Grace Okoye. She's difficult. Min-ho felt the faintest flicker of irritation. Not anger. He didn't waste energy on anger. Just the cold calculation of a problem that needed solving. Set up a meeting. Tomorrow. I'll deal with her personally. You sure? I can. Tomorrow, Jin-woo. Yes, Hyung. The call ended. Min-ho set his phone down and returned to the window, his mind already working through scenarios, strategies, pressure points. Someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated was rare. Interesting, even. but ultimately irrelevant. Everyone had a weakness, a pressure point, a breaking point. He just had to find hers. What Min-ho didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he stood there in his fortress of glass and steel, master of an empire built on fear, was that tomorrow's meeting wouldn't go the way he planned. That the woman who refused to be intimidated would be the one person who saw past his armor. And that Grace Okoye would become the only weakness he couldn't eliminate. The only crack in the wall he'd spent a lifetime building. But would that crack save him? Or destroy everything he'd ever known? Grace Okoye had learned a long time ago that powerful men were all the same. They wore different faces, spoke different languages, built different empires. But underneath, they all believed the world existed to bend to their will. That money, influence, or fear could move any obstacle. And they were almost always right. Almost. But Grace hadn't survived corporate warfare in 3 countries by being easy to intimidate. She'd built her reputation on something far more dangerous than aggression: integrity. The kind that couldn't be bought, threatened, or negotiated away. It made her excellent at her job, and absolutely infuriating to men like Jang Min-ho. She arrived at the sleek high-rise in Gangnam exactly on time, her portfolio tucked under one arm, her expression calm and professional. The building screamed wealth, all marble and glass, designer furniture in the lobby, security guards who looked more like soldiers. Grace had seen it all before. Different city, same game. Ms. Okoye? A young man in an expensive suit approached, bowing slightly. I'm Park Jin-woo. Thank you for agreeing to meet with my cousin. Your cousin? Jang Min-ho. He's the primary stakeholder in the Gangnam development project. Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd reviewed the ownership documents. Multiple shell corporations, layered investments, the kind of structure designed to hide whoever was really pulling the strings. Now she knew why. I see. Well, my concerns remain the same regardless of who signs the checks, Mr. Park. The environmental impact assessment is incomplete, and the labor contracts violate international standards. I can't approve the project as it stands. Jin-woo's smile tightened. Perhaps you'll feel differently after speaking with Mr. Jang. He's very persuasive. Something in his tone made Grace's instincts flare. Not a threat exactly. More like a warning. She'd heard warnings before too. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Jin-woo kept glancing at her like he was trying to figure out if she understood what she was walking into. Grace understood perfectly. She just didn't care. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked more like a war room than an office. Dark wood, minimal decoration, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And at the far end, behind a massive desk, sat a man who made the entire space feel small. Jang Min-ho didn't stand when she entered. Didn't smile. Didn't offer his hand. He simply watched her with eyes that could freeze steel. Grace had expected intimidation. Power plays. The kind of alpha posturing she'd dealt with 100 times. What she hadn't expected was the jolt of recognition that hit her the moment their eyes met. Not recognition like she'd seen him before. Recognition like some part of her already knew him. Knew the danger he represented. Knew she should turn around and walk away. She didn't. Ms. Okoye. His voice was quiet, controlled. Korean accent wrapped around perfect English. Thank you for coming. Mr. Jang. Grace moved forward, set her portfolio on his desk without waiting for permission, and met his gaze directly. Let's skip the pleasantries. You asked for this meeting to change my assessment. I'm here to tell you that won't happen unless the project changes. For a moment, Min-ho just stared at her. Most people looked away when he held their gaze too long. Shifted uncomfortably. Dropped their eyes. Grace didn't blink. And against every instinct he'd honed over 15 years, Min-ho felt something flicker in his chest. Something he didn't have a name for. Interest. Irritation. He couldn't tell. The project is worth $200 million, he said evenly. It will create jobs, revenue, growth, and violate labor laws, displace low-income families, and dump industrial waste into protected wetlands. Grace opened her portfolio, slid a report across his desk. I don't care how much it's worth, Mr. Jiang. My job isn't to make you rich. It's to make sure your money doesn't destroy people in the process. Jin Woo inhaled sharply from somewhere behind her. Even he knew that no one spoke to Min Ho like this. But Min Ho didn't react. He simply picked up the report, scanned it with those cold, calculating eyes, and set it down. You're very principled, Ms. Okoye. I'm very employed, Mr. Jiang. And I'd like to stay that way by doing my job correctly. Principles are expensive, especially in a city like Seoul. Then it's a good thing I'm not paying for them with your money. The corner of Min Ho's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. And that shocked him more than anything she'd said. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that would have made most people sweat. Grace simply waited, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. She was beautiful. He noticed that clinically, the way he noticed useful information. Dark skin, natural hair pulled into a professional bun, eyes that burned with intelligence and something else. Something he couldn't name. Fearlessness? No. Everyone was afraid of something. She was just better at hiding it than most. What will it take to get your approval? He asked finally. I already told you. Fix the labor contracts. Complete the environmental assessment. Relocate the displaced families properly, with fair compensation. That will cost millions. Delay the project by months. Yes. You understand I could have you removed from this project with a single phone call. Grace smiled then. It was a small, knowing smile that did something strange to the air between them. You could try, Mr. Jiang. But my company is contracted directly with the International Investment Board. And they care a great deal about their reputation. Fire me, and they'll just send someone else. Someone who might be even less flexible than I am. Min Ho felt that flicker again. Stronger this time. She just backed him into a corner. Politely. Professionally. Without raising her voice or showing an ounce of fear. No one had done that in years. You're either very brave or very foolish, Ms. Okoye, he said quietly. I'm very good at my job, Mr. Jiang. There's a difference. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The silence stretched, heavy with something neither of them could name. Finally, Min Ho stood. I'll review your recommendations. You'll have my response by the end of the week. It wasn't an agreement, but it wasn't a refusal either. Grace gathered her portfolio, nodded once. Thank you for your time. She turned to leave, and Min Ho found himself speaking before he decided to. Ms. Okoye. She paused, glanced back. You're not afraid of me. It wasn't a question. Just an observation. A fact he was trying to understand. Grace's smile returned, softer this time. Should I be? Most people are. I'm not most people, Mr. Jiang. And then she was gone, the elevator doors closing behind her, leaving Min Ho alone in his fortress with a feeling he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten what to call it. Curiosity. He'd met thousands of people in his life. Powerful people. Dangerous people. People who would kill or die at his command. But he'd never met anyone like Grace Okoye. And for the first time in 15 years, Jiang Min Ho wanted to see someone again. Which terrified him far more than any enemy ever had. Min Ho told himself it was business. That's why he personally reviewed every line of Grace's recommendations instead of delegating it to Jin Woo. Why he found himself reading her reports late at night, analyzing not just her solutions but the way she thought, the way she argued, the precision of her logic. Business. Nothing more. Except business didn't explain why he approved 90% of her demands. Why he authorized the additional environmental studies, restructured the labor contracts, increased the relocation compensation. Why he requested another meeting when an email would have sufficed. You actually did it, Grace said when she walked into his office 3 weeks later, surprise evident in her voice. She set down her briefcase and looked at him with something that might have been respect. I didn't think you would. You presented a compelling case. Min-ho kept his tone neutral, professional. It made financial sense to adjust the project parameters. Financial sense? Grace's lips curved into a knowing smile. Mr. Jang, these changes are going to cost you $15 million and push your timeline back 4 months. That's not financial sense. That's something else. She was right, and they both knew it. Min-ho gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. We should discuss the implementation timeline. Grace sat, crossed her legs, and pulled out her tablet. All business. But there was something different in the air between them now. Something that made the massive office feel smaller, more intimate. They talked for an hour. Then 2. The conversation shifted from permits to Korean business culture to Grace's previous projects in Lagos and New York. Min-ho found himself asking questions that had nothing to do with the development deal. Why Seoul? He asked. You could work anywhere. Grace looked up from her tablet, seemed to consider the question. I go where the work matters. Where I can make a difference. Seoul is building faster than almost any city in the world. That means more opportunities to get things right. Or wrong. And you make sure it's right. I try. There was something in her voice. A weariness. A hint of loneliness that Min-ho recognized because he'd heard it in his own thoughts during the quiet hours before dawn. It must be difficult, he said. Being so far from home. Grace's smile turned sad. I've learned that home isn't always a place, Mr. Jang. Sometimes it's just wherever you can be yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Min-ho looked away, uncomfortable with how deeply they resonated. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been himself. If such a thing even existed anymore. Jin-woo is hosting a dinner tomorrow night, Min-ho heard himself say. For the project investors. You should attend. It would be appropriate, given your role. Grace studied him for a long moment. Is that an invitation or an order? Does it matter? To me. Yes. Min-ho met her eyes. It's an invitation, Ms. Okoye. Then I accept, Mr. Jang. The dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant in Gangnam, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than most people earned in a month. Private rooms, impeccable service, food that was more art than sustenance. Min-ho arrived early, told himself it wasn't because he was anxious. Anxious was weakness. He didn't do weakness. But when Grace walked in wearing a deep blue dress that somehow made her look both professional and breathtaking, something in his chest tightened. She moved through the room with quiet confidence, greeting investors and consultants with the same courtesy she showed everyone. No special treatment for the powerful. No fear of the dangerous. It made her magnetic. She's impressive, Jin-woo murmured beside him. Smart. Beautiful. Stubborn as hell. Min-ho said nothing. Just watched as Grace laughed at something one of the investors said, her whole face lighting up in a way that made her seem younger, softer. Hyung. Jin-woo's voice dropped lower. You're staring. I'm observing. You've been observing her for 3 weeks. People are starting to notice. Let them notice. Jin-woo went quiet. That in itself was a warning. Because if even his cousin was concerned, it meant the situation was more obvious than Min-ho had realized. More dangerous. Later, after the business discussions ended and the alcohol flowed more freely, Min-ho found Grace standing alone on the restaurant's balcony, looking out over the city lights. He should have stayed inside. Maintained distance. Remembered who he was and what he'd built his life to be. Instead, he walked outside and stood beside her. Beautiful, isn't it? Grace said softly, not looking at him. Sometimes I forget how beautiful this city is. You should see it from my penthouse. The view is better. The words were out before he could stop them. An invitation he had no business making. Grace turned to face him, and in the dim light, her expression was unreadable. Is that an invitation or an order, Mr. Jang? He almost smiled. Almost. What do you think? I think you're a very dangerous man who's used to getting what he wants. And what do I want? The question hung between them like a challenge. Like a confession. Grace stepped closer. Not touching, but close enough that Min-ho could smell her perfume, something warm and subtle that made him think of summer nights and things he'd long ago stopped believing in. "I think you want something you've convinced yourself you can't have," she said quietly. "I think you're lonely. And I think you hate that I can see it." No one spoke to him like this. No one dared to see past the armor to the emptiness beneath. It should have made him angry. Should have triggered every defense mechanism he'd built. Instead, it made him feel something far more dangerous. Scene. "You don't know me, Ms. Okoye. Maybe not. But I know men like you. Men who build walls so high they forget there's a world on the other side. Those walls exist for a reason. I'm sure they do." Grace held his gaze, unflinching. But walls that keep people out also keep you locked in. Min-ho felt something crack inside him. Something small but significant, like the first fracture in ice before it breaks. He should walk away. End this before it became something he couldn't control. But he didn't. "Come to dinner with me," he said instead. "Tomorrow. Just the two of us. No business. No investors." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Jang. Min-ho. My name is Min-ho." "Min-ho," she repeated, and the sound of his name in her voice did something to him he couldn't explain. "You know this is a bad idea." "I know. I'm here temporarily. 6 more months at most." "I know that too. And you're—" She gestured vaguely, searching for words. "You're you. And I'm me. This doesn't make sense." "Nothing about you has made sense since you walked into my office," Min-ho said quietly. "But I still want to see you again." It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in years. Maybe ever. Grace looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Logic against desire. Safety against curiosity. Finally, she smiled. Small, cautious, but real. "One dinner. To prove to both of us that this is just curiosity. Nothing more." "Just curiosity," Min-ho agreed, knowing it was a lie. Knowing she knew it too. Because what terrified him most wasn't that Grace Okoye had walked into his carefully controlled world and disrupted everything. It was that some part of him, the part he'd buried so deep he'd thought it was dead, was desperately glad she had. 1 dinner became 2. Then 5. Then Min-ho stopped counting. They met in quiet places where his world wouldn't intrude. Small restaurants in neighborhoods his associates would never visit. A bookstore cafe in Itaewon where Grace liked to work on weekends. Once, late at night, they walked along the Han River like ordinary people living ordinary lives. For the first time in 15 years, Min-ho felt almost normal. Almost human. "Tell me something true," Grace said one evening as they sat in his car overlooking the city. 3 months had passed since that first dinner, and the space between them had shrunk to something neither could deny anymore. "What do you mean?" "Something real. Not the business version of you. Not the controlled, careful words." She turned to face him in the dim light. "Something true." Min-ho was quiet for a long moment. Truth was dangerous. Truth gave people power over you. But Grace already had power over him, whether she knew it or not. "I'm tired," he said finally. "I've been tired for years. And I didn't realize it until I met you." Grace's hand found his across the console. Her fingers were warm, steady, real. "Tired of what?" "All of it. The empire. The control. The constant calculation of every word, every move, every relationship." He looked down at their intertwined hands. "With you, I don't have to calculate. I can just be." "Then be," Grace whispered. "Be with me." When Min-ho kissed her, it felt like falling and flying at the same time. Like every wall he'd ever built was crumbling and he didn't care because she was catching him. They fell into each other slowly, carefully, like two people who knew that what they were building was fragile and precious and dangerous. Grace never asked about his business. Never pressed him for details about the darkness that funded his empire. It was an unspoken agreement between them. She would love the man, not question the monster. And Min-ho protected her fiercely. Made sure his world stayed separate from hers. Made sure no one in his organization knew how much she'd come to mean to him. Because in his world, love was a weapon. And he wouldn't let anyone use her against him. But secrets have a way of surfacing. It was Jin-woo who brought the first warning. "Hyung, we need to talk." His cousin's voice was tense as he entered Min-ho's office late one night. "About the American woman." Min-ho's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in his chest. "What about her? People are noticing. You've been seen together. Questions are being asked." "What kind of questions?" Jin-woo hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. "The elders are concerned. They're saying you're distracted, vulnerable. They're wondering if she's a liability." "She's not. They don't see it that way. And neither do the other families." Jin-woo moved closer, lowered his voice. "There's talk, Hyung, about using her to get to you. About sending a message." Min-ho stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "If anyone touches her." I know. Jin-woo raised his hands. "I'm not threatening her. I'm warning you. This thing between you two, it's becoming visible. And visible means vulnerable." After Jin-woo left, Min-ho sat alone in the darkness, fear coiling in his gut like poison. He'd been careless, reckless. All because Grace made him forget the fundamental rule that had kept him alive this long. Everyone you love becomes a target. He should end it. Send her away. Protect her by cutting her out of his life completely. But when he saw her the next evening, when she smiled at him like he was something good in this world, he couldn't do it. Instead, he pulled her close and made a promise he had no right to make. "I won't let anything happen to you," he murmured against her hair. "I swear it, Grace. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." Grace pulled back to look at him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Min-ho, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Just promise me you'll be careful. Pay attention to your surroundings. If anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you." "You're scaring me." "Good. Be scared. Be smart." He cupped her face in his hands. "My world is dangerous, Grace. I've tried to keep it separate, but lines blur. People notice things. And I need you to understand that there are people who would hurt you to hurt me." "Then maybe we should." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Don't say it. Don't even think it. Min-ho, I love you." The confession tore out of him like a wound opening. "I've never said that to anyone. Never felt it. But I love you, Grace. And I can't lose you. I won't." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too." They held each other in the darkness of his penthouse, two people from different worlds trying to build something beautiful in the shadows. For a few weeks, it felt like enough. Min-ho tightened security without telling Grace why. Increased surveillance on her apartment building. Had trusted men shadow her movements from a distance. She noticed some of it. "The man in the gray car," she said one morning over coffee. "He's been following me for 3 days. He's protection." "From what?" Min-ho met her eyes. "From my life." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I knew what you were when I fell in love with you. I'm not naive, Min-ho. I know the money that funds your empire isn't clean. I know people fear you for reasons that have nothing to do with business. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with you. The rest, we'll figure it out." It was the wrong answer. The dangerous answer. Because it gave him hope that maybe, somehow, they could make this work. That hope lasted exactly 4 more days. Min-ho was in a meeting with the family elders when his grandmother spoke. She was 83 years old, sharp as a blade, and more ruthless than half the men in the room. "We hear you've been keeping company with a foreign woman," she said, her voice deceptively mild. "An American." The room went silent. Min-ho kept his expression neutral. "My personal life is my own, Halmione." Not when it affects the family. She set down her teacup with deliberate precision. This woman, what is she to you? A friend. Don't insult my intelligence, Min-ho. I've lived too long to be lied to by my own grandson. Her eyes were hard, calculating. You care for her. Perhaps even love her. Min-ho said nothing. In his world, silence was often the smartest answer. Love is a weakness we cannot afford, his grandmother continued. Especially not for someone who doesn't understand our world. Who could never be part of it. She's not a threat. She's a distraction. A vulnerability. And vulnerabilities get people killed. His grandmother leaned forward. End it, Min-ho. Cleanly. Quietly. Before our enemies notice what we've already seen. No. The word dropped like a stone. Around the table, the elders shifted uncomfortably. His grandmother's expression didn't change. That wasn't a request. And this isn't a negotiation. Min-ho stood, every inch the powerful man who'd built an empire. I've given this family 15 years of my life. Every decision, every sacrifice, every drop of blood has been for this organization. But Grace is mine. And she's not negotiable. He walked out before anyone could respond, his heart pounding with a mixture of defiance and dread. Because he knew what he'd just done. He'd painted a target on Grace's back. And in his world, targets didn't survive long. The photographs arrived 3 days after Min-ho's confrontation with his grandmother. Jin-woo brought them personally, his face pale and tight. He didn't say a word, just placed the manila envelope on Min-ho's desk and stepped back like it might explode. Min-ho knew that look. He'd seen it before, right before everything fell apart. Inside were 8 photographs. All of Grace. Meeting with men Min-ho didn't recognize in coffee shops, restaurants, parking garages. The images were date-stamped, going back weeks. In the last photo, she was accepting an envelope from a man Min-ho did recognize. Lee Sang-woo. His oldest rival. The head of the Busan syndicate who'd been trying to undermine Min-ho's empire for 5 years. Where did you get these? Min-ho's voice was deadly quiet. They were delivered to the office this morning. Anonymously. Jin-woo swallowed hard. Hyung, I didn't want to believe it either, but... But what? I had our people verify the locations and timestamps. They're legitimate. Grace was at all those places, meeting with those people. Min-ho stared at the photographs, his mind working through possibilities, angles, explanations. There had to be a reason. Some logical explanation that didn't mean what these images suggested. The man in the last photo, Jin-woo continued. Lee Sang-woo's lieutenant confirmed the meeting. Said Grace approached them first. Said she was offering information. What kind of information? About you. Your movements. Your business operations. Your vulnerabilities. The word hit like a blade between the ribs. Min-ho's hands curled into fists on the desk. That's impossible. Grace wouldn't. I thought the same thing. So I dug deeper. Jin-woo pulled out another folder. Her employment history checks out, but her financial records don't. She's received 3 wire transfers in the past 2 months. $50,000 each. Untraceable sources. That doesn't prove. There's more. Jin-woo's voice dropped. The consulting firm that hired her? It's partially owned by a shell corporation linked to Lee Sang-woo. She was planted here, Hyung. From the beginning. Min-ho felt something cold spreading through his chest. The same numbness he'd cultivated for years, the protective ice that kept him from feeling anything. It was coming back. Reclaiming territory Grace had stolen from it. Where is she now? Her apartment. Do you want me to? No. Min-ho stood, his movements mechanical. I'll handle this myself. The drive to Grace's apartment took 20 minutes. Min-ho spent every second of it trying to find an alternative explanation. Trying to reconcile the woman who'd looked at him with love in her eyes with the woman in those photographs. His rational mind screamed that something was wrong with this picture. That Grace wasn't capable of this kind of deception. But his survival instincts, honed through decades of betrayal, whispered a different truth. Everyone betrays you eventually. Love is just another weapon. You were a fool to forget. Grace answered the door with a smile that died the moment she saw his face. Min-ho, what's wrong? He pushed past her into the apartment, the photographs clenched in his hand. Who are you really? What? I don't. Don't lie to me. He turned on her, and Grace actually stepped back from the coldness in his eyes. I trusted you. I gave you access to my life. And you've been selling information to my enemies. He threw the photographs on her coffee table. Grace stared at them, her face going pale. Min-ho, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been meeting with Lee Sang-woo's people? Why you're accepting money from untraceable accounts? Why you were planted here by a company my rival partially owns? It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? Min-ho's voice rose for the first time, breaking through his control. Tell me, Grace. Make me understand how this isn't exactly what it appears to be. Grace's hands shook as she picked up the photographs. Tears were streaming down her face, but Min-ho forced himself to see them as another manipulation. Another lie. These meetings, yes, I had them. But not for the reasons you think. Then why? Because they approached me first. Grace's voice cracked. 2 months ago, men started following me, asking questions about you. About us. I was terrified, Min-ho. I didn't know what to do. So you met with them. Took their money. No. I mean, yes, but... She pressed her hands to her face, trying to compose herself. They threatened me. Said if I didn't give them information, they'd hurt people I care about. My family back home. My colleagues. You. And the money. I never took it. They deposited it to make it look like I did. To set up exactly this situation. It sounded plausible. Almost believable. But Min-ho had heard convincing lies before. From people he'd trusted even more than Grace. The consulting firm, he said coldly. Explain that. Grace's face crumpled. I didn't know. I swear to God, Min-ho, I had no idea about the ownership structure. They hired me through normal channels. I thought. You thought you'd get close to me. Win my trust. Make me vulnerable. No. She moved toward him, but he stepped back. The rejection in that single movement broke something in her eyes. Min-ho, please. I love you. Everything between us is real. Love. He laughed, and it was the cruelest sound Grace had ever heard. You're good. I'll give you that. You played the part perfectly. The warmth, the honesty, the way you looked at me like I was something other than what I am. Because you are. You're more than the empire, more than the violence. Stop. Min-ho's voice went quiet again, which was somehow worse than the anger. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear another word from you. Min-ho, please listen to me. I was a fool. He turned toward the door, his back rigid. I forgot the first rule. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone wants something. And love is just the weapon people use when they can't afford bullets. That's not true, isn't it? He looked back at her one last time, and his eyes were empty. The man who'd held her, who'd whispered promises in the dark, was gone. The cold, ruthless boss had returned. You wanted to get close to the monster, Grace. Congratulations. You succeeded. I never wanted the monster. I wanted you. But Min-ho was already walking out, Grace's sobs following him into the hallway. In the car, Jin-woo waited with his usual quiet efficiency. What do you want me to do about her? Min-ho stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Nothing. She's not a threat anymore. Are you sure? If she's working with Lee. She's not. The words came out flat, certain. Because despite everything, despite the photographs and the evidence and his own protective cynicism, some part of him still believed her. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Then why? Because someone wants me to think she is. Min-ho's hands curled into fists. Someone went through a lot of effort to manufacture this betrayal. To make me push her away. Your grandmother? Maybe. Or Lee Sang-woo. Or both. Min-ho closed his eyes. But it doesn't matter. How can it not matter? Because I can't risk it, Jin-woo. If there's even a chance Grace is compromised, keeping her close endangers everything. The organization. The family. He took a shaky breath. Her. So you're just giving up? Min-ho opened his eyes, and they were hollow. I'm choosing survival. Like I always have. But as they drove away, leaving Grace sobbing in an apartment that suddenly felt empty, Min-ho couldn't shake one terrible thought. What if survival wasn't enough anymore? What if he'd just destroyed the only real thing he'd ever had? And what if, by the time he realized the truth, it would already be too late to get her back? Grace called 17 times that first night. Min-ho let every call go to voicemail, deleted her messages without listening to them, told himself it was the smart move, the necessary move, the move that was slowly killing him from the inside out. For 3 days, he buried himself in work, meetings, territory negotiations, the business that had always been enough before Grace walked into his life and reminded him what it felt like to be human. He told himself the ache in his chest was anger, betrayal, professional disappointment. He almost believed it. On the 4th day, Grace stopped calling. And somehow, the silence was worse. She's leaving, Jin-woo reported that afternoon. Booked a flight back to the States. Leaves tomorrow morning. Min-ho's hand tightened around his glass. Good. Is it? Jin-woo asked carefully. Because you look like hell, Hyung. And I've been going through the evidence again. There are inconsistencies. It doesn't matter. How can you say that? Because even if she's innocent, Min-ho's voice cracked slightly, and he hated himself for it. Even if this was all manufactured, she's still a target. As long as she's connected to me, she's in danger. Letting her go is the only way to keep her safe. Does she know that? No. And she never will. Min-ho drained his glass. Better she hates me than dies for me. But that night, alone in his penthouse, Min-ho made a mistake. He listened to one of her voicemails. Min-ho, please. Just give me a chance to explain. I know how this looks, but I swear to you, I never betrayed you. I love you. Her voice broke. I love you. And I need you to believe me. Please. Just, please call me back. He should have deleted it. Should have reinforced the walls he'd spent 3 days rebuilding. Instead, he played it again. And again. Until he couldn't take it anymore. Min-ho grabbed his keys and drove to Grace's apartment, telling himself he just needed closure. One final conversation to end this cleanly. He was a liar. He was halfway across the city when his phone rang. Jin-woo. Hyung, we have a problem. Grace's apartment. There's been a breach. Unknown hostiles. I've sent security, but... Min-ho's blood turned to ice. How many? At least 3. They got past building security 10 minutes ago. He didn't hear the rest. Just pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove like the demons of hell were chasing him. Because they were. The demons he'd created by loving someone in a world where love was weakness. Min-ho reached Grace's building in 8 minutes. Abandoned his car in the middle of the street and took the stairs 3 at a time. Behind him, he heard his security team arriving, but he didn't wait. Grace's apartment door was ajar. He pulled his gun and moved inside with the cold precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. The living room was empty. Kitchen clear. Bedroom. Looking for someone? Min-ho spun to find 3 men stepping out of the shadows. Not his people. Not friends. Lee Sang-woo's enforcers. Where is she? Min-ho's voice was deadly calm, but his finger was already on the trigger. Gone. The leader smiled. Took her about 20 minutes ago. By now, she's halfway to our safe house. The world tilted. Min-ho had faced death, torture, impossible odds. But nothing had ever terrified him like those words. "This is a message from Lee Sang-woo," the man continued. "You took something that belonged to him. Now he's taking something that belongs to you. She has nothing to do with our business." "Doesn't she?" "Word is you've gone soft for this woman. That you'd do anything to keep her safe." The enforcer's smile widened. "Let's test that theory." Min-ho didn't hesitate. 3 shots. 3 bodies. All headshots. He was already calling Jin-woo as the bodies hit the floor. "They have Grace. Lee Sang-woo's people. I need locations. Now." "Hyung, wait. Now." 15 minutes later, Min-ho had an address. A warehouse in Incheon that Lee used for interrogations. For torture. He assembled a team. Armed them. Gave orders with mechanical efficiency while his mind screamed with images of Grace in pain. Grace afraid. Grace calling for him while he'd been too proud and too stupid to believe her. They hit the warehouse hard and fast. Min-ho led the assault personally, something he hadn't done in years. Didn't care about strategy or safety or anything except finding her. The warehouse was a maze of shipping containers and shadows. Gunfire echoed off metal walls. Men fell. His men. Lee's men. Min-ho barely registered it. And then he heard her scream. He ran toward the sound, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Found a locked shipping container. Shot the lock off. Tore the door open. Grace was inside, tied to a chair, blood trickling from a cut on her temple. But alive. Conscious. And when she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "Min-ho, I've got you." He was already cutting her bonds, his hands shaking for the first time in 15 years. "I've got you. You're safe now. They said you wouldn't come. That you didn't care anymore. They lied." Min-ho pulled her into his arms, held her so tight he was probably hurting her. But he couldn't let go. Couldn't breathe until he felt her heart beating against his chest. "Grace, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. Should have protected you. Should have." "Min-ho." Grace pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were filled with something that broke him completely. Not anger. Not fear. Pity. "This is your world," she whispered. "This violence. This constant danger. And I can't." Her voice cracked. "I can't live like this. Looking over my shoulder. Wondering if every shadow is a threat. If every day might be the last time I see you alive. I'll protect you. I swear I'll." "You can't." Tears streamed down her face. "You can't even protect yourself. You just shot 3 men. There are bodies in my apartment. And tomorrow, there will be more. Because this is who you are, Min-ho. And I love you, God help me, I love you. But I can't survive in your world." The words hit harder than any bullet ever had. "So what are you saying?" But he already knew. Could see it in her eyes. "I'm saying goodbye." Grace pressed her hand to his cheek, and it felt like a benediction and a funeral all at once. "I'm leaving Seoul. Tonight. And I need you to let me go. Grace. Please." Her voice broke completely. "Please don't make this harder. Don't make me choose between loving you and surviving. Because right now, I can't do both." Min-ho wanted to argue. To promise things would be different. To tear down his empire if it meant keeping her. But he knew she was right. As long as she was with him, she would be a target. A weakness his enemies would exploit. A woman he loved more than his own life. Constantly in danger because of that love. So he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He let her go. "I'll have Jin-woo arrange your flight," he said quietly. "And a security detail to make sure you get out safely." "Min-ho. Don't." He stepped back before his resolve could crumble. "Just go, Grace. Before I change my mind. Before I'm selfish enough to keep you in this hell because I can't imagine breathing without you." Grace sobbed once, pressed her hand to her mouth, and ran. Min-ho stood alone in that warehouse surrounded by bodies and blood and the ashes of the only good thing he'd ever had. And for the first time since he was a child, Jang Min-ho cried. He didn't know, couldn't know, that Grace was crying too. That she was running not just from his world, but toward a secret that would change everything. A secret that was already growing inside her. A secret that, 5 years later, would bring them face to face again and force Min-ho to become a man he never thought he could be. Grace made it exactly 3 weeks before her body betrayed her secret. She was in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house in Atlanta, trying to rebuild a life from the broken pieces Min-ho had left behind. Trying to convince herself that leaving Seoul was the right choice. That survival mattered more than love. Then the nausea hit. At first, she blamed it on stress. Grief. The way her body was processing trauma and heartbreak and the loss of a man she'd loved more than she'd thought possible. But when it happened again the next morning, and the morning after that, a different kind of fear settled into her bones. No, it couldn't be. Grace bought 3 pregnancy tests from 3 different pharmacies. Took them in a gas station bathroom because she couldn't bear to do it at home where her mother might find the evidence. All 3 came back positive. She sat on that dirty bathroom floor and stared at the plastic sticks until the lines blurred, her mind racing through impossible calculations. 5 weeks. Maybe 6. Which meant it happened right before everything fell apart. Right before the photographs and the accusations and the night Min-ho looked at her with empty eyes and let her walk away. She was carrying the child of a man who thought she'd betrayed him. The child of a man whose world had nearly killed her. Grace pressed her hands to her stomach, still flat, still showing no evidence of the life growing inside, and made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't tell him. "Grace, honey, are you okay?" Her mother's voice drifted through the bathroom door when Grace finally emerged, her face washed, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm fine, Mama. Just tired." "You've been tired for weeks." Her mother studied her with the penetrating gaze only mothers possess. "Maybe you should see a doctor." "Maybe." Grace forced a smile. "I'll make an appointment." She did. The next day. Dr. Rachel Chen was kind, professional, and matter-of-fact as she confirmed what Grace already knew. "You're about 6 weeks along. Healthy. Normal hormone levels." Dr. Chen looked up from her chart. "Do you have questions about your options?" Grace's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I'm keeping the baby." "Okay. Then we'll need to discuss prenatal care, nutrition, and..." Dr. Chen paused. "Is the father involved?" The question hit like a physical blow. Grace thought of Min-ho, of the way he'd held her after saving her from that warehouse, of the tears in his eyes when she'd said goodbye, of the empire of violence and blood that surrounded him like armor. "No," she said quietly. "The father isn't involved. And he won't be." That night, Grace lay in bed with her laptop open, searching for information she'd been avoiding for weeks. Jang Min-ho's name appeared in dozens of articles. Most were business-related, corporate acquisitions, real estate developments, charity donations that bought legitimacy. But buried deeper were the whispers, the rumors, the carefully worded speculation about Seoul's underground power structure and the young boss who'd consolidated control with ruthless efficiency. Grace read about territory wars, about rivals who'd disappeared, about a man who ruled through fear and strategy and an emptiness that made him more dangerous than men twice his age. And she understood, with crushing certainty, what bringing a child into his world would mean. That child would become a target, a weakness, a weapon others would use against Min-ho without hesitation. She'd seen it herself, lived it, barely survived it. How could she condemn her baby to that same fate? Grace closed the laptop and made a second decision. She would disappear. Not just from Seoul. From Min-ho's reach entirely. She'd build a new life somewhere he'd never think to look. Raise this child in safety and peace and normalcy. Their daughter would never know the fear Grace had felt in that warehouse. Would never see her father's eyes go cold and empty. Would never have to choose between love and survival. It was the only way to protect her. Over the next month, Grace executed her plan with the same precision she'd once used to audit billion-dollar corporations. She withdrew her savings, closed her consulting contracts, told her family she'd gotten a job offer in Portland, far enough from Atlanta to be plausible, close enough that they wouldn't worry too much. Then she moved to Denver instead. Found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood where no one asked questions. Got a remote consulting job that let her work from home. Built a life so ordinary, so invisible, that even Minho's resources wouldn't think to look there. And every night, she talked to the baby growing inside her. "You're safe now," she whispered, her hands on her expanding belly. "I promise you, baby girl, you're safe. Your father," her voice always broke here, "your father is a complicated man. A dangerous man. But he would have loved you. If things were different, if the world was different, he would have loved you so much." The pregnancy progressed normally. Grace's body changed, swelled, created life from heartbreak. She took her prenatal vitamins religiously, ate healthy foods, went to every appointment, did everything right. But she couldn't stop the dreams. Dreams where Minho found her. Where he looked at her belly with those sharp, calculating eyes and knew. Where he demanded answers she couldn't give. Where their daughter became a pawn in wars Grace couldn't control. She'd wake up gasping, her heart racing, one hand protective over her stomach. "It's okay," she'd whisper. "Mama's got you. Mama won't let anything happen to you." At 7 months, Grace started setting up the nursery. Painted the walls a soft yellow. Assembled a crib by herself, her belly making the task nearly impossible but refusing to ask for help. Because help meant questions. Questions meant lies. And lies might eventually lead back to the truth. Back to Seoul. Back to Minho. Back to the world she'd fled. "What are you going to tell her?" her mother asked during one of their weekly phone calls. "When she asks about her father?" Grace had prepared for this question. Rehearsed the answer. "I'll tell her the truth. That I loved him. That he loved me. But that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome the distance between two worlds." It wasn't really a lie. Just an incomplete truth. The kind of incomplete truth she'd have to live with for the rest of her life. At 8 months, Grace stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her belly impossibly large, her body transformed into something she barely recognized. But her eyes held a strength she'd never possessed before. "We're going to be okay," she told her reflection. Told her daughter. "I don't know how yet. I don't know if I'm making the right choice. But I know I'm making the only choice I can live with." She placed both hands on her belly, felt her daughter kick in response. "Your father is the most dangerous man I've ever known," Grace whispered. "But he's also the only man I've ever truly loved. And that's the tragedy, baby girl. That's the secret I'll carry for both of us." She thought she was protecting her daughter from Minho's world. She thought she was making the brave choice. The right choice. What Grace couldn't know as she stood alone in that Denver apartment, preparing to bring new life into a world built on secrets, was that 5 years later, fate would shatter every wall she'd built. That one chance encounter would expose the truth she'd hidden. And that Minho would discover he had a daughter. But would he be the monster she'd fled from? Or the man she'd always hoped he could become? And would her years of silence destroy any chance they had at becoming the family their daughter deserved? 5 years changed everything. Grace had learned to exist in the space between truth and lies, building a life in Denver that was simple, quiet, and safe. She worked as a remote consultant for sustainable development projects, using her skills without the international travel that had once defined her career. Without the risk of accidentally crossing paths with a man whose eyes looked back at her every time their daughter smiled. Hannah Okoye was 5 years old, and she was perfect. Perfect in ways that broke Grace's heart daily. Because Hannah had Minho's sharp intelligence, his intense focus, his ability to read people with unnerving accuracy. But she also had Grace's warmth. Her curiosity. Her stubborn refusal to accept simple answers when complex truths existed. And she had questions. So many questions. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" Grace was making breakfast when Hannah asked, her small voice cutting through the morning routine like a knife. It wasn't the first time she'd asked. But it was the first time her tone carried hurt instead of simple curiosity. Grace set down the spatula, took a breath, and turned to face her daughter. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging, her dark eyes, Minho's eyes, watching Grace with an intensity that made her feel exposed. You do have a daddy, sweetheart. Everyone has a daddy. Then where is mine? Grace moved to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down so they were eye level. This conversation had been coming for months. She'd prepared for it. Rehearsed answers that were truthful without being complete. Your daddy lives very far away. In a place called South Korea. Why doesn't he come visit? Because. Grace chose her words carefully. Because your daddy and I decided it would be better if we lived in different places. Sometimes grown-ups make hard choices to keep the people they love safe. Hannah's forehead wrinkled in that way that meant she was processing, analyzing, trying to understand the logic behind adult decisions. Does he know about me? The question pierced straight through Grace's carefully constructed armor. No, baby. He doesn't. Why not? Because telling him would put you in danger. Because his world would swallow you whole. Because I was terrified and alone and made the only choice I thought I could live with. Because it's complicated, Grace said instead. And one day, when you're older, I'll explain all of it. But for now, I need you to trust that Mama is doing what's best for you. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then she climbed into Grace's lap, wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck, and whispered, I trust you, Mama. But I still wonder about him sometimes. Grace held her daughter and tried not to cry. Life settled into rhythms. School drop-offs and pickups. Homework at the kitchen table. Weekend trips to the park where Hannah made friends with the fearless confidence of a child who didn't yet understand that the world could be cruel. Grace watched her daughter climb monkey bars and thought about Minho. About how he'd never see these moments. Never hear Hannah's laugh or feel her small hand in his or know that he'd created something pure in a life built on violence. It was a lonely kind of grief. The mourning of a family that could never exist. But Grace was strong. She'd survived heartbreak and pregnancy alone. Built a career while raising a child. Made a home from nothing. She could survive this too. Until the day Hannah came home from school with a drawing. We had to draw our families, Hannah explained, spreading the paper on the kitchen counter. That's me, and that's you, and that's. Grace stared at the third figure in the drawing. A tall man with dark hair and eyes that Hannah had colored with unusual care. Who is that, sweetheart? My daddy. Hannah said it so simply, so matter-of-factly. I don't know what he looks like, so I just drew what I think. Is that okay? Grace's throat closed. It's perfect, baby. That night, after Hannah was asleep, Grace stood in her daughter's doorway and watched her breathe. Watched the rise and fall of her small chest, the way her hand curled around her favorite stuffed animal. And she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what life might have looked like. Minho teaching Hannah to be brave. To be strong. To see the world with those sharp, analytical eyes. Grace teaching them both that strength didn't have to mean hardness. That walls could be lowered. That love was worth the risk. A family. Whole and healing and impossible. Grace wiped away tears and went to bed alone. The years continued. Hannah grew taller, smarter, more curious about the father-shaped absence in her life. Someday, she told Grace on her 6th birthday, I'm going to find him. My daddy. And I'm going to ask him why he didn't want to know me. Baby, it's not that he didn't want to know you. Then why didn't you tell him? The accusation was soft but devastating. Grace knelt down, took her daughter's hands. Because I was scared. Because his life was dangerous. And I wanted to keep you safe. And maybe I was wrong, Hannah. Maybe I made the wrong choice. But it was the only choice I knew how to make at the time. Hannah studied her mother's face with Minho's intensity. Then she threw her arms around Grace's neck. It's okay, Mama. I know you love me. That's enough. But Grace wondered if it really was. Money was tight sometimes. Grace worked hard, but single parenting on a consultant salary in an expensive city meant sacrifices. Hannah wore hand-me-downs. They ate simple meals. Vacations were trips to the library, not Disneyland. But they were happy. Or at least, Grace told herself they were happy. Until the night Hannah had a nightmare. Grace woke to screams and ran to her daughter's room. Found Hannah thrashing in bed, tears streaming down her face. "Sure, baby, I'm here. Mama's here." "There were bad men," Hannah sobbed. "And you were scared, and there was a daddy, but he wasn't there, and—" Grace pulled her daughter into her arms, her own heart racing. Because Hannah couldn't possibly remember. She'd been born after Seoul, after the warehouse, after everything. But sometimes trauma lived in blood. In genes. In the spaces between what we know and what we fear. "You're safe," Grace whispered. "I promise you, baby, you're safe." But was she? Could Grace really promise that when Minho's world was built on violence? When enemies could surface at any moment? When the man she'd loved and fled from ruled an empire that didn't forgive or forget? Grace had spent 5 years trying to outrun the past. But the past had a way of catching up. She just didn't know it was about to happen. Didn't know that in 3 weeks, she'd accept a consulting contract that would take her back to Seoul for the first time since she'd fled. Didn't know that Hannah would insist on coming with her, excited to see the place where her mother had once worked. Didn't know that fate was about to shatter every carefully constructed wall she'd built. Because in a city of 10 million people, in a park on a random Sunday afternoon, Grace would look up from watching her daughter play and see a man who'd haunted her dreams for 5 years. A man who would take one look at Hannah and know. And in that moment, every secret Grace had kept, every sacrifice she'd made, every lonely night she'd survived would come crashing down around them both. The question wasn't whether Minho would discover the truth. The question was, what would he do when he did? Minho discovered the truth 6 months after Grace left. 6 months of hollow victories and empty beds and the kind of silence that screamed louder than any accusation. He'd tried to move on. Buried himself in work. Expanded his empire. Made more money, acquired more power, eliminated more enemies. None of it filled the void Grace had left behind. It was Jin Woo who brought him the evidence. His cousin walked into Minho's office late one night with a folder that looked too thin to contain a confession but too heavy to be anything else. "You need to see this, Hyung." Minho didn't look up from his desk. "If it's not urgent, it can wait. It's about Grace." The name alone made Minho's hands still on the keyboard. He hadn't heard anyone speak it out loud in months. Had forbidden his people from mentioning her, as if silence could erase the memory of her. It couldn't. What about her? His voice was carefully neutral. Jin Woo set the folder down. "I've been investigating." Quietly. The photographs, the meetings, the money transfers. None of it was what we thought. Minho's jaw tightened. Jin Woo. Lee Sang-woo orchestrated everything. The photographs were staged using a body double. The wire transfers were sent without Grace's knowledge to frame her. Even the consulting firm, yes, Lee had partial ownership, but Grace's hiring was legitimate. She had no idea. The words fell like hammer blows. Minho opened the folder with hands that had forgotten how to shake. Inside were bank records, testimony from Lee's lieutenants who'd turned informant, even security footage showing the woman in the photographs. Similar to Grace, but not her. Never her. "She was innocent," Jin Woo said quietly. "The entire thing was a setup to drive a wedge between you. To make you push away the one person who actually made you human." Minho stared at the evidence until the words blurred. She was innocent. He'd accused her. Doubted her. Let her walk away believing he thought she'd betrayed him. And she'd been innocent the entire time. "Where is she?" The question came out rough, desperate. "I don't know." She disappeared completely. No forwarding address. No digital footprint. It's like she vanished. Find her. Minho stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Use every resource we have. I don't care what it costs. Hyung, I've been trying. 4 months. She's good at hiding. Or she doesn't want to be found. Then try harder." Jin Woo flinched at the raw emotion in Minho's voice. Because the cold, controlled boss never yelled. Never lost composure. Never let anyone see the cracks. But Grace had shattered more than his walls. She'd shattered the man he'd built himself into. And Min-ho was left standing in the rubble, finally understanding what he'd lost. The search became an obsession. Min-ho hired private investigators in 3 countries, traced her family, her friends, her professional contacts, searched for employment records, credit card activity, anything that might lead him to her. He found nothing. Grace had disappeared as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. And with each dead end, each fruitless lead, Min-ho's desperation grew. "She doesn't want to be found," Jin-woo said gently after 6 months of searching. "Maybe you should accept that." "No." Min-ho's voice was hollow. "I can't." "Why?" "Because you love her. Because I destroyed her." Min-ho finally looked up, and his eyes held a grief Jin-woo had never seen before. "I looked at the woman I loved and called her a liar. A traitor. I chose my empire over her safety. I let her walk away thinking I believed she'd betrayed me. You were manipulated." "That's not an excuse." Min-ho slammed his hand on the desk. "I should have trusted her. Should have believed her when she told me the truth. But I was too damaged, too broken, too convinced that everyone eventually betrays you to see what was right in front of me." He dropped back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me," he whispered. "And I treated her like she was nothing." Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment. "What will you do if you find her?" "Beg for forgiveness. Spend the rest of my life making it up to her. Prove that I can be the man she deserved instead of the monster I was." "And if she doesn't forgive you?" Min-ho's smile was broken. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life living with what I did. But at least I'll know I tried." The years passed with agonizing slowness. Min-ho continued searching even as the leads dried up. Even as Jin-woo gently suggested it was time to move on. Even as his grandmother pressured him to marry someone suitable, someone Korean, someone who understood their world. He refused. Because somewhere in his chest, in the space where his heart used to be, Min-ho carried a stubborn, irrational hope. That Grace was alive. That she was safe. That maybe, someday, he'd find her and get the chance to say the words he should have said that night in the warehouse. "I believe you. I trust you. I love you. Please don't leave." His empire grew. His reputation solidified. People whispered that Jang Min-ho had become even colder, even more ruthless than before. They were wrong. He wasn't cold. He was empty. Hollow. Going through the motions of a life that had lost all meaning. Work. Meetings. Territory disputes. Violence when necessary. But no joy. No warmth. No grace. "Hyung, you're killing yourself," Jin-woo said one night, finding Min-ho in his office at 3 in the morning, staring at a photograph, the only one he had of Grace, taken secretly during one of their dinners. "I'm already dead," Min-ho said flatly. "I've been dead since the night she left." "Then what are you waiting for?" "A miracle." Min-ho traced Grace's face in the photograph. "A second chance I don't deserve. A moment where the universe decides I've suffered enough and gives me one more opportunity to not be a complete failure as a human being. And if that moment never comes, then I'll die searching. Because the alternative, accepting that she's gone forever, that I lost her through my own stupidity," his voice cracked. "I can't survive that, Jin-woo. I just can't." 5 years after Grace left, Min-ho still searched. Still hoped. Still carried the weight of his greatest regret like a stone around his neck. He dismantled Lee Sang-woo's organization piece by piece, methodically destroying the man who'd orchestrated their separation. It brought him no satisfaction. Just a hollow sense of justice that felt like revenge without purpose. Because Grace was still gone. And Min-ho was still alone. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he sat in his penthouse overlooking a city that had lost all its beauty, was that fate was finally preparing to answer his prayers. That a business opportunity would soon bring him to a park on a Sunday afternoon. That he would look up and see a woman who'd haunted his dreams for 5 years. And that beside her would be a little girl with his eyes, his face, and a smile that would stop his heart completely. But would finding them be the second chance he'd prayed for? Or would his years of searching only lead to the devastating truth of everything he'd missed? And could Grace ever forgive the man who'd chosen fear over faith when it mattered most? It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring when Min-ho's world stopped turning. He'd come to Hongang Park for a business meeting, neutral ground for negotiations with a political contact who preferred discretion. The meeting had ended early, and Min-ho found himself walking along the river, Jin-woo trailing at a respectful distance. 5 years of searching had taught him not to hope, not to see Grace in every dark-haired woman, not to torture himself with possibilities that led nowhere. So when he saw her, his mind rejected it at first. Just another woman, another stranger, another disappointment in a long line of almosts and not-quites. But then she turned her head, laughing at something, and Min-ho's heart stopped. Grace. She was here. In Seoul. After 5 years of searching the entire world, she was here, barely 50 meters away. Min-ho started walking toward her before his brain caught up with his body. Before he could think about what he'd say, how he'd explain, whether she'd even want to see him. He was halfway there when he noticed the child. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, running ahead of Grace toward the playground. Dark curly hair pulled into 2 puffs. Bright yellow dress. Laughter that carried across the park like music. Min-ho's steps slowed. Something about the child tugged at his attention. Something familiar in the way she moved, the tilt of her head, The girl turned around, calling back to Grace. And Min-ho saw her face. The world tilted. Because he was looking at his own eyes. His own bone structure. His own features reflected in miniature on a child's face that was also Grace's. The perfect blend of both of them in a way that could only mean one thing. No, it couldn't be. But even as his mind scrambled for alternative explanations, his body knew. His heart knew. This was his daughter. Hyung. Jin-woo's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Min-ho couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Could only stare at the little girl who was climbing monkey bars with fearless confidence, who had his eyes and Grace's smile and, oh God, he had a daughter. That child, Min-ho heard himself say. Do you see her? Jin-woo followed his gaze. The little girl in yellow? What about her? Look at her face. Jin-woo looked. Really looked. And Min-ho watched the exact moment recognition hit his cousin. Watched Jin-woo's eyes widen with shock. Hyung. She looks like me. Min-ho's voice was hollow. She looks like me. But that would mean, Jin-woo's head snapped toward the woman sitting on the park bench. Is that Grace? Min-ho didn't answer. Was already moving toward them, his legs carrying him forward on instinct while his mind tried to process the impossible. Grace had been pregnant when she left. Grace had hidden his child from him for 5 years. Grace had. She looked up and saw him. The color drained from her face so fast Min-ho thought she might faint. She stood abruptly, her eyes darting to her daughter, calculating distance, escape routes, danger. Still protecting the child. Even now. Even from him. The realization cut deeper than any knife. Grace. Her name came out broken. She didn't run. Didn't speak. Just stood frozen as Min-ho approached, stopping a few feet away because he didn't trust himself to get closer. Up close, he could see the changes 5 years had carved into her. She was thinner, tired, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. And terrified. Min-ho, she whispered. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. His eyes drifted to the little girl, who'd noticed her mother's distress and was climbing down from the playground equipment. But I think I know the answer. Grace's hands clenched at her sides. Please don't. How old is she? Silence. Grace. How old is she? 5. The word was barely audible. She's 5. Min-ho did the math. 5 years since Grace left. 9 months before that would be. Right when everything fell apart. Right when he'd accused her and pushed her away and let her walk out of his life. You were pregnant. It wasn't a question. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Min-ho, you were pregnant, And you left, and you never told me." His voice was rising, 5 years of grief and guilt and longing crystallizing into something that felt like rage but hurt like heartbreak. "You had my child and kept her from me for 5 years. You have no right. No right." Minho's control shattered completely. "She's my daughter. I had every right. I spent 5 years searching for you. 5 years thinking you hated me, that I destroyed the best thing in my life, that—" "Mama!" The small voice cut through their argument like a bell. Both adults turned to find the little girl standing there, her eyes, Minho's eyes, wide with concern as she looked between them. "Mama, why is the man yelling?" Grace immediately dropped to her daughter's level, her hands gentle on the child's shoulders. "It's okay, baby. This is just an old friend of Mama's. We're having a grown-up conversation. But you're crying." "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups cry even when things are okay." The little girl studied Minho with an intensity that stole his breath, because it was his own analytical gaze reflected back at him, his own way of assessing threats and calculating safety. "You look sad too," she said to Minho with the blunt honesty only children possess. Minho knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more undeniable. She had his eyes, his chin, his serious expression. But Grace's warmth, her curiosity, her fearless way of meeting the world. She was perfect. "I am sad," he said quietly. "But I'm also very happy. Because I just met you." The little girl tilted her head. "Do I know you?" "No. Not yet. But I'd like to change that." He looked up at Grace, saw the panic in her eyes, the way she was already calculating how to get her daughter away from him. "What's your name?" "Hannah. It means one in Korean. Mama says it's because I'm her number one." She said it with such pride that Minho's throat closed. "Hannah." He tested the name, felt it settle into his chest like a missing piece clicking into place. "That's a beautiful name. What's your name?" "I'm Minho." He paused, looked at Grace, saw her shake her head in silent pleading. I'm someone who knew your mama a long time ago." "Are you why Mama gets sad sometimes?" "When she thinks I'm sleeping." The question hit him like a physical blow. Grace stood abruptly. "Hannah, baby, why don't you go play on the swings for a few more minutes? Mama needs to talk to Mr. Jang." "Okay." Hannah ran off with the easy resilience of children who haven't yet learned that the world can break you. Minho rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "You told her about me," he said. "She knows I exist. She knows she has a father. She doesn't know." Grace's voice broke. "She doesn't know it's you." "Why, Grace? Why did you keep her from me?" "Because I was protecting her. Your world nearly killed me, Minho. How could I bring a baby into that? How could I let her become a target for your enemies?" "So you just decided I didn't deserve to know? That I had no right to my own child? You gave up that right when you chose your empire over me." The words hung between them, sharp and true and devastating. Minho took a shaky breath. "You're right. I did. And I've spent 5 years living with that mistake. But Grace," his voice cracked, "she's my daughter. Mine. And you kept her from me. To keep her safe." "From what?" "From me." Grace's silence was answer enough. Minho felt something break inside him. Because the woman he loved, the mother of his child, was terrified of him. Saw him as a threat to their daughter rather than a father. And maybe she was right. Maybe he was the monster she'd run from. But looking at Hannah, at his daughter, laughing on the swings, innocent and perfect and everything good he'd never thought he could create, Minho made a decision. "I want to know her," he said quietly. "I want to be part of her life." "Minho, I'm not asking permission, Grace. I'm telling you what's going to happen." He stepped closer, and Grace flinched but held her ground. "That little girl is mine. My blood. My daughter. And I've already missed 5 years of her life because of mistakes we both made. I won't miss another day. You can't just watch me. Grace stared at him, and Min-ho saw the war happening behind her eyes. Fear, anger, and underneath it all, a flicker of the love that had never quite died. But what neither of them knew, what they couldn't see as they stood in that park, their daughter playing in the background, 5 years of secrets finally exposed, was that Min-ho's enemies had been watching, had seen the child, had already begun calculating how a daughter could destroy the man who'd built an empire on having no weaknesses. And the real war, the one that would force Min-ho to choose between his empire and his family once and for all, was just beginning. They ended up at a small cafe 3 blocks from the park. Min-ho had insisted. Grace had resisted. But Hannah had innocently asked if they could get hot chocolate, and neither adult could refuse the hopeful look in her eyes. So now they sat at a corner table, Grace tense and protective, Hannah coloring happily with crayons the waitress had provided, and Min-ho unable to look away from the daughter he'd never known existed. She likes art, he said quietly, watching Hannah draw what appeared to be a family of butterflies. She likes everything. Grace's voice was tight. She's curious, fearless, too smart for her own good sometimes. She gets that from you. No. Grace met his eyes. She gets that from both of us. Whether I wanted to admit it or not. The words hung heavy between them. Hannah looked up, studied Min-ho with that unnerving intensity. Are you rich? Hannah. Grace's face flushed. That's not polite. It's okay. Min-ho almost smiled. Almost. What makes you ask that? Your watch is fancy. And your car outside is really shiny. And you have that look. What look? The look people get when they're used to everyone doing what they say. Hannah tilted her head. Mama says rich people sometimes forget to be nice because they don't have to be. Min-ho glanced at Grace, saw her wince. But Hannah wasn't wrong. Your mama is very wise, he said. And yes, I have money. But that doesn't make me better than anyone else. Okay. Hannah went back to her drawing, satisfied. Can I have more hot chocolate? You've had 2 cups already, baby, Grace said gently. But it's so good. How about we compromise? You can have 1 more, but then we need to go home. Min-ho's chest tightened at the word home. Because wherever that was, it wasn't here. It wasn't with him. Grace ordered another hot chocolate for Hannah, then turned to Min-ho. We need to talk. Really talk. But not here. Then where? My hotel. After Hannah goes to sleep. Grace's eyes were steel. You want answers? Fine. But you'll get them on my terms. Min-ho nodded, knowing he had no leverage. No right to demand anything. Not when he'd lost everything that mattered 5 years ago. Grace's hotel was modest. Not the luxury Min-ho could have provided, but clean and safe. The kind of place someone chose when they were being careful with money. When they were raising a child alone. Hannah fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the park and the unexpected excitement. Grace tucked her in with practiced tenderness, kissed her forehead, and stood there for a long moment just watching her daughter breathe. Min-ho watched from the doorway, his heart breaking with every second. 5 years of this. 5 years of bedtimes and morning routines and small moments he'd never get back. Grace finally stepped out of the bedroom, leaving the door cracked. She poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands and stood at the window, her back to Min-ho. Ask, she said quietly. Whatever you want to know. Ask now, because I don't know if I can do this again. When did you find out? 3 weeks after I left Seoul. I was living with my parents, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. Then I started getting sick every morning. Min-ho's hands clenched. And you didn't think to tell me? Grace spun around, and her eyes blazed. Tell you? Tell the man who just accused me of being a spy? Who'd looked at me like I was garbage? Who chose his empire over my life? I didn't know. Exactly. You didn't know. You didn't trust me enough to believe me when I told you the truth. So why would I trust you with my child? Our child, Grace. She's ours. No. Grace's voice broke. She's mine. I'm the one who was terrified and alone and pregnant in a foreign country with no one to help me. I'm the one who worked through morning sickness and doctor's appointments and labor alone. I'm the one who's been there for every fever, every nightmare, every scraped knee for 5 years. Tears streamed down her face now. You want to know why I didn't tell you? Because I was protecting her. From your world. From your enemies. From the violence that nearly killed me. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. From you. The last 2 words landed like bullets. Min-ho felt something inside him crack. Not the controlled fracture of a man maintaining composure, but the complete, devastating break of a soul finally confronting what it had destroyed. I searched for you, he said hoarsely. For 5 years. Every day. Every resource I had. I never stopped looking. Why? So you could finish the job? Make sure I was really gone. Because I loved you. The words tore out of him. Because 6 months after you left, Jin-woo proved you were innocent. That everything, the photographs, the meetings, the money, all of it was fabricated by my enemies to drive us apart. And it worked, Grace. It worked because I was too broken and too damaged to trust the one person who actually loved me. Grace stared at him, shock replacing anger. You knew I was innocent? I've known for 4.5 years. And I've spent every one of those years trying to find you. To apologize. To beg you to give me another chance. Min-ho's voice cracked completely. But you were gone. And I thought you hated me. That I'd destroyed the best thing in my life and would die without ever making it right. He sank onto the hotel couch, his head in his hands. I never knew about Hannah. I swear to you, Grace, if I'd known, if I'd had any idea you were pregnant, I would have torn the world apart to find you, to protect you, to be there. Would you? Grace's voice was softer now, but still guarded. Or would your family have convinced you it was another manipulation? Another lie? Min-ho looked up at her, and for the first time in 5 years, he let her see everything. The grief, the regret, the endless, hollow ache of living without her. I don't know, he admitted. The man I was 5 years ago? Maybe. Probably. But that man died the night you walked away, Grace. What's left is just someone trying to figure out how to live with what he's done. Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice trembled. She asked about you. Hannah. All the time. Why don't I have a daddy? Where is he? Does he know about me? Does he love me? Grace wiped at her tears. And I had to lie to her. Had to tell her that her father lived far away, that things were complicated, that someday she'd understand. What did you tell her about me? That I loved you. That you loved me. But that sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the distance between 2 different worlds. Grace's laugh was broken. I made you sound like a tragic hero instead of a monster who pushed away the woman he loved? You're not a monster, Min-ho. You're just damaged. We both are. Min-ho stood, moved closer but didn't touch her. I missed everything. Her birth. Her first words. Her first steps. 5 years of watching her grow. I know. I can't get that back. Can never make up for not being there. I know that too. But I'm here now, Grace. And I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for the chance to be her father. To know her. To be part of her life in whatever way you'll allow. Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and Min-ho saw her seeing past the empire and the power to the broken man underneath. She's going to have questions. About why you weren't there. About your world. About the danger. I'll answer them honestly. And your family. Your enemies? What happens when they find out you have a daughter? Min-ho's jaw tightened. Then I'll do what I should have done 5 years ago. I'll choose you, both of you, over everything else. That's easy to say now. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever said. Because I know what it means, Grace. I know what I'll have to give up. What I'll have to destroy. But I'm ready. Grace searched his face. Are you? Really? Because the moment you claim her publicly, she becomes a target. The moment your world knows you have a weakness, they'll use it. Are you prepared to dismantle everything you've built to keep her safe? Minho thought of Hannah's smile. Her fearless eyes. The way she'd looked at him in the park with innocent curiosity. His daughter. His second chance. His reason to finally become something other than the monster he'd been. Yes, he said simply. I'll burn my entire empire to the ground if it means keeping her safe. But what Minho didn't know, what neither of them could see as they stood in that hotel room, trying to piece together a family from broken promises, was that his enemies were already moving. That photographs of him with Hannah had been taken. That whispers were spreading through Seoul's underworld about a weakness that could finally destroy the untouchable Jang Min-ho. And that their daughter's safety was already hanging by a thread neither of them could see fraying. The threat came 48 hours after that conversation in the hotel room. Minho had spent those 2 days learning how to be a father. Taking Hannah to breakfast while Grace worked on her consulting project. Listening to her chatter about school and friends and the butterflies she'd seen that morning. Learning that she liked pancakes but not waffles, loved purple but thought pink was too obvious, and had memorized every constellation in the night sky. Every moment with her felt like a gift, and a reminder of everything he'd missed. He was walking her back to the hotel, her small hand tucked trustingly in his, when Jin Woo's call came through. One look at his cousin's face on the screen told Minho everything he needed to know. Get Hannah inside. Now. Minho didn't question it. Just scooped Hannah up, she squealed in surprise, and carried her through the hotel lobby at a pace that was just short of running. What's wrong? Hannah asked, her arms around his neck. Why are we going so fast? Just a game, princess. We're racing. Grace met them at the door, already alerted by Minho's security team. Her face went pale when she saw his expression. What happened? Minho set Hannah down gently. Grace, I need you to pack. Everything. Right now. Minho. Please. Trust me. I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to pack. Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and whatever she saw in his eyes made her nod. Hannah, baby, can you help Mama pack your toys? We're going on an adventure. Really? Where? Somewhere safe. Minho said quietly. Somewhere no one can hurt you. Because Jin Woo's message had been clear and terrifying. They know about Hannah. Photos everywhere. Kim's faction is making moves. You need to get them out. Now. Kim Dae-young. One of Seoul's most ruthless crime lords and Minho's oldest enemy. The man had been waiting years for Minho to show weakness. Now he had it. Minho stepped into the hallway, called Jin Woo back. How bad? Bad. Photos of you with Hannah are circulating through every major organization in Seoul. Kim's people have been asking questions. Where she's staying. Her schedule. Grace's movements. He's going to take her. Yes. To force your hand. Make you choose between your empire and your daughter. Jin Woo's voice was grim. Hyung, this is exactly what we feared. How long do I have? Hours. Maybe less. Kim's already moved teams into position around the hotel district. Minho's blood ran cold. Get our people there. Full detail. No one gets close to that hotel. Already done. But Hyung, this is bigger than one extraction. Kim's building a coalition. He's convincing the other families that your weakness makes you a liability. That you're compromised. Then let them think that. My only priority is getting Grace and Hannah somewhere safe. And then what? You can't hide them forever. Minho was quiet for a long moment. No. But I can eliminate the threat. You're talking about going to war. I'm talking about ending this. Once and for all. He hung up and returned to the room. Grace had most of their belongings packed with impressive efficiency. Hannah sat on the bed, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide. Mama says we have to leave because bad people might come. Minho knelt in front of his daughter, took her small hands in his. "That's right. But I promise you, Hannah, no one is going to hurt you. Your mama and I are going to keep you safe." "Are you scared?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, nearly broke him. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm very scared. Because you're the most important thing in the world to me, and I just found you. I'm not going to lose you." Hannah studied his face with those two knowing eyes. Then she leaned forward and hugged him. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. The first gesture of trust. And Min-ho felt something in his chest crack open. "It's okay to be scared," Hannah whispered, repeating words Grace must have taught her. "Mama says brave people are scared too. They just don't let it stop them." Min-ho held his daughter and thought that Grace had raised an extraordinary human being. That he didn't deserve either of them. But he'd die protecting them anyway. The convoy arrived 20 minutes later. 4 armored vehicles, 16 of Min-ho's most trusted soldiers, and enough firepower to start a small war. Because that's exactly what this was. "Where are we going?" Grace asked as they moved through the hotel's service exit. "My compound outside the city. It's the most defensible position I have. Min-ho, if we go there, everyone will know." "They already know, Grace." The moment I was seen with Hannah, this became inevitable. He helped her into the middle vehicle, then lifted Hannah in beside her. "The only choice now is whether I hide or I fight." "And you're choosing to fight." "I'm choosing to protect my family. Everything else is just details." They were 3 blocks from the hotel when the first attack came. 2 black SUVs cut them off from the front. Another blocked them from behind. And suddenly they were surrounded by armed men who clearly weren't there to talk. "Get down!" Min-ho shouted, pushing Grace and Hannah to the floor of the vehicle as bullets shattered the windows. The armored glass held, but barely. Hannah was crying now, terrified. Grace covered her with her body, whispering reassurances Min-ho knew she didn't believe. "Go, go, go!" Jin-woo screamed at the driver. The vehicle lurched forward, ramming through the blockade with brutal force. Behind them, Min-ho's security team engaged the attackers. The sound of gunfire filled the air. This was his world. This violence. This chaos. This was what Grace had fled from 5 years ago. And now his daughter was in the middle of it. "I'm sorry," Min-ho said, though he didn't know if Grace could even hear him over the noise. "I'm so sorry I brought this to you." Grace looked up at him, and her eyes were fierce. "Just get us out of here. Apologize later." They made it to the compound, but Min-ho knew it was only temporary safety. Kim wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when he'd tasted blood. That night, after Hannah finally cried herself to sleep in Grace's arms, Min-ho stood in his office staring at a tactical map of Seoul. Jin-woo entered quietly. The attack was a message. "Kim wants you to know he can reach them any time." "Then I'll send my own message." "Hyung, if you go after Kim directly, it will trigger a full-scale war. The other families will have to choose sides. Let them choose. I'm done playing politics. I'm done compromising. I'm done sacrificing the people I love for the sake of peace with men who would destroy them the moment it served their interests." Min-ho turned to face his cousin. "Send word to every family head in Seoul. Tell them Jang Min-ho is claiming his daughter publicly. Tell them she's under my protection. And tell them that anyone who threatens her will face the full weight of my organization." "That's a declaration of war." "No." Min-ho's voice was ice. "It's a promise. And I intend to keep it." Jin-woo was quiet for a moment. "What about Grace? What does she think?" "I haven't told her yet. She's not going to like it. She doesn't have to like it. She just has to trust that I'll do whatever it takes to keep them both alive." But even as he said it, Min-ho knew the truth. Trust was the one thing he'd broken beyond repair 5 years ago. And now he was asking Grace to give it to him again, in the middle of a war that could destroy them all. But what Min-ho didn't understand yet, what he'd only realized when it was almost too late, was that protecting his family would require more than violence and strategy. It would require the one thing he'd never given anyone: complete surrender. Not of his power, but of his walls. Not of his empire, but of his heart. And the question that would determine all their fates was simple but devastating. Was Jang Min-ho capable of choosing love over control, even if it meant losing everything he'd built? Or would his daughter pay the price for his father's inability to change? The family meeting was called for the following evening. Every head of the Jang organization would be there. His grandmother, the elders, the lieutenants who'd served his family for decades, all gathering to discuss the crisis of Min-ho's exposed weakness. They expected him to explain, to justify, to promise that Grace and Hannah wouldn't interfere with business. Min-ho had very different plans. "You can't go in there and just burn it all down," Jin-woo said as they prepared. "These people have been loyal to your family for generations. Loyal to the organization. Not to me. There's a difference." Min-ho adjusted his tie with mechanical precision. "And the organization nearly cost me everything that matters." "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth. That I'm done." Min-ho turned to face his cousin. "I'm done sacrificing my humanity for power. Done choosing fear over love. Done being the monster they created." Jin-woo stared at him. "You're really going to walk away? From everything your father built? Everything you've spent 15 years protecting?" "No. I'm going to dismantle it, piece by piece, until there's nothing left for my enemies to use against my family. They'll never accept that. Then they'll have to choose. Adapt to the new reality or find themselves on the wrong side of it." The conference room fell silent when Min-ho entered. 12 people sat around the massive table. 12 people who'd shaped Seoul's underworld for decades. And at the head of the table, his grandmother, still sharp, still dangerous, still convinced that power mattered more than anything else. Min-ho. She didn't stand. Didn't smile. "I assume you know why we're here." "I do, Halmione. But I don't think you know why I'm here." He didn't sit. Just stood at the end of the table, his hands relaxed at his sides, his expression calm. "For 15 years, I've done everything you asked. Built this empire. Eliminated threats. Sacrificed pieces of myself I'll never get back. All for the family. All for the organization. And we're grateful. I'm not finished." Min-ho's voice cut through the room like a blade. "I sacrificed the woman I loved because you convinced me she was a threat. And you were right. She was a threat. To the carefully controlled machine you'd built. To the cold, emotionless weapon you'd turned me into." His grandmother's eyes narrowed. "Min-ho, Grace Okoye made me human again. And that terrified all of you. So you, or someone in this room, helped orchestrate her removal. Fed me lies. Manipulated evidence. Made sure I'd push her away before she could weaken me." Murmurs around the table. Nervous glances. "It worked," Min-ho continued. "I sent her away. Broke her heart. Broke my own. And 5 years ago, I thought I'd succeeded in becoming exactly what you wanted. A man with no attachments, no vulnerabilities, no weaknesses." He paused, let the silence stretch. "Then 3 days ago, I discovered I have a daughter." The room erupted. Shocked exclamations. Angry demands for explanation. Min-ho waited until the noise died down. "Her name is Hannah. She's 5 years old. And she's the most extraordinary person I've ever met." His voice softened despite himself. "She's brave, curious, kind. Everything good I never thought I could create. And I've already missed 5 years of her life because I chose this organization over the woman carrying my child." "Where is the child now?" his grandmother asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Safe, protected, and completely off limits to anyone in this organization." "Min-ho, you can't possibly think." "I'm not asking permission, Halmione. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Min-ho straightened, and something in his posture made everyone in the room lean back. "I'm claiming Grace and Hannah publicly. As my family. Under my protection. And I'm restructuring this entire organization to make sure they're never threatened because of who I am." "That's insane," one of the elders sputtered. "You'd expose us all for a woman and a child?" "No. I'd burn us all down to protect them. There's a difference." His grandmother stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You'd throw away everything your father built? Everything our family has sacrificed for? For a foreign woman and a bastard child?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Minho's voice went deadly quiet. "Call my daughter that again, and grandmother or not, you'll regret it." For the first time in his life, Minho saw something flicker in his grandmother's eyes. Fear. "I'm transitioning our operations," he continued. "Legitimate business only. The weapons trafficking, the protection rackets, the blood money that's funded this organization for 3 decades, it all ends. Now." "You can't be serious." "I've already started. Half our illegal operations have been shut down. The other half will be dismantled within the month. Anyone who wants to stay can adapt to the new structure. Anyone who doesn't can leave with a generous severance and my guarantee of safe passage." "And if we refuse?" The question came from Park, one of his father's oldest friends. "Then you become my enemy, and I eliminate my enemies." The threat was delivered without emotion. Just a simple statement of fact. "You've gone soft," his grandmother said, disgust dripping from every word. "That woman has made you weak." "No." Minho smiled, and it was the saddest thing anyone in that room had ever seen. "She made me strong enough to walk away from people who taught me that love was weakness, that power mattered more than humanity, that being a monster was preferable to being vulnerable." He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. "I was 8 years old when my father died. 8 years old, and you put me on a path that turned me into something barely human. You taught me that emotions were liabilities, that trust would get me killed, that the only thing that mattered was power. We taught you to survive," his grandmother snapped. "You taught me to exist. Grace taught me to live. And I'll be damned if I let you take that away from me again." Minho turned toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Kim Dae-young and his faction targeted my daughter yesterday. Attempted kidnapping in broad daylight. They're dead by morning. All of them. And I'm putting word out to every organization in Seoul. Hannah and Grace are under my absolute protection. Anyone who touches them, threatens them, or even looks at them wrong will face consequences that make our previous wars look like minor disagreements." "You're declaring war on half of Seoul's underworld," Jin-woo said quietly. "No. I'm declaring that I'm done playing by rules that cost me everything. They can adapt or they can die. Those are the only options." Minho walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. Behind him, he heard arguments erupting, accusations flying, the sound of an empire beginning to fracture. He didn't care. In the compound's secure wing, Grace and Hannah waited. Grace looked up when he entered, her eyes full of questions. "What did you do?" "What I should have done 5 years ago." Minho sat down beside them, and Hannah immediately climbed into his lap, trusting him now in a way that made his chest ache. "I chose you, both of you, over everything else. Minho, your organization doesn't matter. Not compared to this." He wrapped his arms around his daughter, met Grace's eyes over Hannah's head. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've done terrible things, made catastrophic choices, been the villain in our story more often than the hero." Grace was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "But I'm asking anyway," Minho continued, his voice breaking. "I'm asking for the chance to be Hannah's father. To prove I can be the man you both deserve. And if it takes the rest of my life, if I have to dismantle everything I've ever built, if I have to become someone completely different, I'll do it. Because you two are my family. My only family that matters." Hannah looked up at him with those 2 knowing eyes. "Does that mean you're my daddy for real now? Not just a friend?" Minho looked at Grace, saw her nod through her tears. "Yes, princess. I'm your daddy. If you'll have me." Hannah wrapped her small arms around his neck and squeezed tight. "I've been waiting for you forever." The words shattered something in Min-ho that had been holding itself together through sheer will. He held his daughter and cried for the first time since he was a child. Cried for the years he'd lost. For the man he'd become. For the family he'd almost destroyed through his own fear and pride. And Grace's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt like forgiveness. Like hope. Like maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had burned. But outside the compound walls, in the dark corners of Seoul where power and violence intersected, Min-ho's enemies were already planning their response. Because a man who chose love over fear was either the most dangerous opponent they'd ever faced, or the easiest target they'd ever been given. And only time would tell which truth would prevail. The war Min-ho had declared ended within 3 weeks. Kim Dae-young's organization was dismantled with surgical precision. Other families who'd sided with him found their operations systematically destroyed. And those who'd chosen neutrality quickly pledged allegiance when they saw the ferocity with which Min-ho protected what was his. But winning the war didn't mean winning Grace's trust back. That, Min-ho discovered, was a far longer battle. "She's still afraid of you," Jin-woo observed one morning, watching Grace keep careful distance from Min-ho during breakfast. "Not physically, but emotionally." "I know." Min-ho watched Hannah chatter happily between them, oblivious to the tension. "I broke something in her 5 years ago. You don't fix that kind of damage with a few weeks of good behavior. So what are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes. For as long as it takes." He started small. Every morning, Min-ho made Hannah breakfast while Grace worked. Nothing elaborate, just pancakes or eggs or whatever their daughter requested. But it was consistent, reliable, present, the things he'd never been before. "You don't have to do this," Grace said the first week, watching him flip pancakes with concentration that seemed better suited to negotiating million-dollar deals. "I want to. She's my daughter. I've missed 5 years of mornings. I'm not missing any more." Grace didn't argue, just watched him with those cautious eyes that broke his heart a little more each day. Because she was waiting for him to fail. To revert to the cold, controlling man who'd pushed her away. To choose power over family when things got difficult. Min-ho understood. He'd earned every bit of her doubt. So he kept showing up. When Hannah had nightmares, Min-ho was there. Sitting beside her bed, telling her stories about stars and brave princesses until she fell back asleep. When Grace's consulting project hit complications, Min-ho made calls, legitimate ones, using connections from his business empire rather than his criminal one, to smooth things over. When Hannah asked to go to the park, Min-ho went. Every time. Even when he had meetings. Even when it was inconvenient. Because his daughter mattered more than convenience. "You're different with her," Grace said one afternoon, watching Min-ho and Hannah build an elaborate castle out of blocks. "Softer. More patient than I've ever seen you. She makes me want to be better." Min-ho carefully placed another block on Hannah's tower. "Makes me remember that there's more to life than control and power." Is it enough? Being better for her? The question held layers Min-ho understood perfectly. "No," he admitted. "I want to be better for both of you. For all of us. But I understand if you need time, Grace. I understand if you never fully trust me again. I want to trust you." Grace's voice was soft. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this version of you disappearing. Of waking up one day and finding the old Min-ho back, the one who chose his empire over everything else." Min-ho met her eyes. "That man doesn't exist anymore. I killed him the day I found out I had a daughter. People don't change that easily." "You're right. They don't." He turned back to the block tower. "But people can be motivated to change. And you two are the best motivation I've ever had." It was the small moments that slowly cracked Grace's armor. The way Min-ho learned Hannah's schedule and showed up for every promised activity without fail. The way he listened when Hannah talked about her day, really listened, asking questions and remembering details that most adults would forget. The way he'd restructured his entire business empire around being present, delegating ruthlessly so he could be home for dinner every night. "He's trying," Grace's mother said during one of their video calls. Grace had finally told her family the truth. All of it. "I'm not saying you have to forgive him, baby. But I am saying he's putting in the work. Work isn't enough, Mama. Trust takes time." "Yes. And he seems willing to give you that time." One evening, 3 months after they'd been reunited, Hannah asked the question Grace had been dreading. "Daddy, why weren't you there when I was little?" Min-ho had been reading her a bedtime story. He stopped, his hand frozen on the page, and looked at Grace with something like panic. Grace nodded. "Tell her the truth." Min-ho set the book down and pulled Hannah onto his lap. "That's a complicated question, Princess. And you deserve an honest answer. Okay. Your mama and I loved each other very much. But I made some very bad mistakes. I didn't trust her when I should have. I pushed her away when I should have held on tight. And by the time I realized how wrong I'd been, she was already gone. Why didn't you find us? I tried. For 5 years, I looked everywhere. But your mama was very good at hiding. And she had good reasons to hide from me." Hannah looked at Grace. "Because Daddy's world was dangerous?" "Yes, baby." Grace's throat was tight. "I was trying to keep you safe." "But you're together now," Hannah said with the simple logic of a child. "So it's okay?" Min-ho and Grace exchanged a look. "We're working on it," Min-ho said carefully. "Your mama is being very brave by giving me a chance to be your daddy. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve that chance." "Do you love Mama?" The question hung in the air. Min-ho looked at Grace, and she saw everything in his eyes. The regret, the longing, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, she could love him again too. "More than anything," he said quietly. "I never stopped." Hannah nodded, satisfied. "Then you should tell her that. Mama says people need to hear when they're loved." After Hannah fell asleep, Grace found Min-ho standing on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. "You handled that well," she said, joining him. "I was terrified I'd say the wrong thing." "You didn't. You were honest. That's what she needed." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Grace." Min-ho's voice was hesitant. "What Hannah said, about telling you I love you. I know words aren't enough. I know I've said things before that I didn't follow through on. But—" "Min-ho." Grace stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I know you love me. I can see it in everything you do. The way you show up. The way you're trying. The way you look at Hannah like she hung the stars. But that's not the same as forgiving me." "No," Grace admitted. "It's not. Forgiveness is harder than I expected. Some days I look at you and I remember how much you hurt me. How alone I was. How terrified I was bringing Hannah into the world without you." Min-ho flinched but didn't look away. "But other days," Grace continued, "I look at you with our daughter and I see the man I fell in love with, the one who was hiding under all those walls. And I think, maybe we can build something new. Not what we had before, but something stronger. Something honest." "I'll take anything you're willing to give me," Min-ho said quietly. "Even if it's just the chance to be Hannah's father. Even if you never love me again the way you did before." Grace turned to face him fully. "The way I loved you before almost destroyed me, Min-ho. I'm not that naive anymore. I'm not that trusting. I know. But maybe—" She took a shaky breath. "Maybe I could learn to love you differently. More carefully. With my eyes open to who you really are, both the good and the broken parts." Min-ho's hand found hers on the railing. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning that love, Grace. I promise you." "Don't make promises," Grace said softly. "Just keep showing up. Keep being the father Hannah deserves. Keep being the man you're trying to become. That's enough. Is it? Is it really enough for you?" Grace looked at their intertwined hands. At this man who'd torn her heart apart and was now piecing it back together with patient, careful dedication. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said finally. "When you've proven this isn't temporary. When I've seen you choose us over power more than once. When the fear of losing you again doesn't wake me up at night. And if 6 months isn't enough, then ask me again in a year. Or 2. Or however long it takes for me to believe that this," she gestured between them, "is real and permanent and worth the risk." Min-ho brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I'll wait, Grace. For 6 months or 6 years or forever. Because you and Hannah are worth every second." And watching him stand there, this powerful, dangerous man who'd dismantled an empire for his family, Grace felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the first fragile shoots of hope. What neither of them knew, what they couldn't see as they stood together on that balcony, tentatively rebuilding what had been broken, was that forgiveness would come. Not in dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of kept promises. In mornings and bedtimes and ordinary moments that proved Min-ho had truly changed. And when it finally came, it would be more beautiful than anything either of them had imagined. But first, they had one more bridge to cross. One more question that needed answering. Could they be not just parents to Hannah, but partners to each other? Could they build a real family from the broken pieces of their past? And was Min-ho ready to take the final step that would bind them together forever? 10 months changed everything. Not overnight. Not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. But in the slow, steady accumulation of mornings where Min-ho made breakfast. Evenings where he read bedtime stories. Weekends where he took Hannah to the park and listened to Grace talk about her consulting work like it was the most important thing in the world. In 10 months, Min-ho didn't miss a single promise he made to his daughter. And Grace noticed. "You've been different," she said one evening after Hannah had gone to bed. They'd fallen into a routine of sitting together on the balcony, talking about nothing and everything. "Lighter, somehow. I'm happy." Min-ho said it like he was discovering the word for the first time. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy. Even though you've dismantled half your empire? Especially because of that." He turned to look at her. "That empire was a prison, Grace. I just didn't realize it until I had something worth being free for." Grace studied him in the dim light, searching for cracks in the facade, for signs of the old Min-ho, cold, controlling, willing to sacrifice anything for power. She found none. "I've been thinking," Min-ho said carefully, "about the future, about what comes next for us." Grace's heart skipped. And I want to ask you something. But I need you to know that whatever you answer, it won't change how I feel about you or my commitment to Hannah." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught. "I'm not proposing," Min-ho said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I wanted you to have this anyway." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. No diamond. No ostentation. Just a pure, elegant circle. "5 years ago, I had a ring made for you. Something elaborate and expensive that I thought you'd want. But I never got the chance to give it to you." Min-ho's voice was soft. "This is different. This is the ring I should have gotten then. Simple. Honest. Real. Min-ho. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, to trust me with forever, this ring will be here. No pressure. No timeline. Just a promise that I'm not going anywhere." Grace took the box with trembling hands, stared at the ring that represented everything they'd lost and everything they might still build. "What if I'm never ready?" she whispered. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life being Hannah's father and your partner and whatever else you'll let me be. Because this," he gestured between them, "is already more than I ever thought I'd have. I won't ruin it by demanding more than you can give." Grace closed the box carefully and set it on the table between them. "Ask me again in a month." Min-ho's eyes widened. "Grace, I'm not saying yes. But I'm not saying no either." She met his gaze. "I'm saying ask me again in a month. And we'll see where we are." For weeks later, On a quiet Sunday morning while Hannah played in the garden, Min-ho asked, "Grace Okoye, will you marry me?" Grace looked at the man kneeling in front of her. At the father who'd shown up every single day for their daughter. At the partner who'd respected her boundaries and earned her trust through patient, consistent action. At the man who'd destroyed an empire to protect their family. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Min-ho, I'll marry you." When he slipped the ring on her finger, it felt like a promise and a healing all at once. Hannah screamed with delight when they told her. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" she asked, bouncing between them. "We've been a real family for months, Princess," Min-ho said, scooping her up. "This just makes it official." "Will I get to be in the wedding?" "You'll be the most important person there," Grace assured her. "Because none of this would exist without you." It was true. Hannah had been the catalyst for everything. The reason Min-ho had changed, the bridge between two broken people, the hope that had pulled them both from darkness. The wedding was small. Grace's family flew in from Atlanta. Jin-woo stood as Min-ho's best man. And Hannah, wearing a purple dress that matched her mother's, walked down the aisle scattering flower petals with serious concentration. Min-ho's grandmother didn't come. Neither did most of the old organization's leadership. Min-ho didn't care. Because when Grace walked toward him, radiant and beautiful and finally trusting him with her whole heart, nothing else mattered. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he whispered when she reached him. "You did," Grace said softly. "But you found us again. And this time, you're not letting go." "Never," Min-ho promised. "Never again." The vows they wrote themselves were simple and honest. Min-ho promised to choose their family over power, every single day, for the rest of his life. Grace promised to trust him with her heart again, even though it was the scariest thing she'd ever done. And Hannah, when asked if she had anything to say, stood on a chair and announced to everyone, "My daddy loves my mama, and my mama loves my daddy, and I love both of them. And we're a family forever and ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The reception was held in the garden of their new home, a house Min-ho had bought specifically because it had a large backyard where Hannah could play. Far from the city. Far from the violence of his old life. A place where they could build something new. "You did it," Jin-woo said quietly, finding Min-ho watching Grace dance with Hannah. "You actually changed." "No," Min-ho corrected. "They changed me. I just stopped fighting it. And the business. The organization. Completely legitimate now. Real estate development, consulting, technology investments. Nothing that would put my family at risk." Min-ho smiled slightly. "Turns out I'm just as good at building legal empires as illegal ones." "Your grandmother is still furious." "My grandmother will either adapt or stay angry. Either way, it's not my problem anymore." Min-ho's eyes never left Grace and Hannah. "I have everything I need right here." That night, after the guests had left and Hannah had fallen asleep exhausted from dancing, Min-ho and Grace stood in their daughter's doorway. "We did it," Grace whispered. "We actually built a family from all that brokenness." "You did it," Min-ho corrected, pulling her close. "You raised an incredible daughter alone. You survived when you should have been destroyed. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve." "We both did it," Grace insisted. "Together." Min-ho turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her waist. "I love you, Grace. I loved you 5 years ago. I love you now. And I'll love you for every day I have left. I love you too." Grace reached up to cup his face. "Even the broken parts. Especially the broken parts. Because they're what make you real." When they kissed, it felt like coming home. Like healing. Like a promise that some things, some loves, were strong enough to survive anything. Even betrayal. Even years apart. Even the weight of empires and the scars of mistakes that could never be undone. 6 months after the wedding, Grace found out she was pregnant again. She told Min-ho on a Sunday morning, handing him the positive test while Hannah made pancakes with Jin-woo in the kitchen. Min-ho stared at the test, then at Grace, then at the test again. "We're having another baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. Yes. Are you okay with that? Minho pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. I'm more than okay. His voice broke. I get to do it right this time. I get to be there from the beginning. To see you pregnant. To hold your hand during appointments. To be there when our child is born. Grace felt tears on her shoulder and realized Minho was crying. I won't miss a moment, he promised. Not a single moment. And he didn't. The years that followed were full of ordinary magic. Hannah started school and made friends and asked a million questions about everything. Their son was born, a boy they named Daniel, with Grace's smile and Minho's serious eyes. Minho's business empire grew, but he kept strict boundaries. Home by 6 every evening. Weekends sacred. Family dinners that no meeting could interrupt. He taught Hannah to be brave and Daniel to be kind. He loved Grace with a devotion that made her friends sigh and her mother shake her head in amazement. And sometimes, late at night when everyone else was sleeping, Minho would stand in the hallway and listen to his children breathe. Would feel Grace's warmth beside him in their bed. Would marvel at the family he'd built from the ashes of his worst mistakes. The coldest man in Seoul had become the warmest father. The most ruthless boss had become the most devoted husband. And the empire he'd destroyed to protect his family? He'd replaced it with something infinitely more valuable. Love. Trust. A home full of laughter and ordinary miracles. And every single day, Minho thanked whatever force had brought Grace back into his life. Had given him Hannah. Had shown him that redemption was possible, even for monsters who'd forgotten how to be human. Because in the end, love hadn't made him weak. It had made him stronger than he'd ever been. Strong enough to change. Strong enough to choose peace over power. Strong enough to build a family from broken pieces and call it beautiful. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. If this story stayed with you, there are more waiting here. Subscribe to Afro Korean Tales and Stories for a love that crosses cultures and lingers. Tell us in the comments, what emotion are you leaving this story with?